Dr. Indu Khoshla, and the topic is disorders of surfactant metabolism, a case-based discussion. Dr. Khoshla, please.
Madam does not need any introduction. She's a very renowned pulmonologist and sleep specialist.
Good evening, friends. I know you guys have had a long day, and this is not really the best topic to discuss towards the end of the day, but let me try and make it as interesting as I can because I'm going to discuss real-life cases. Okay. We know that surfactant metabolic protein dysfunction, they are basically genetic defects, and they arise from either defective formation or clearing of surfactant. We also know that these disorders can be secondary to a variety of etiologies, and it should be considered as one of the causes of interstitial lung disease. The presentation of these disorders is very variable, and it can present right from birth to any time later on in life. And I think in a case discussion today, there was a presentation of a case where the mother also was symptomatic and the child was diagnosed to have a surfactant metabolic protein dysfunction. So the commonest presentation of this disorder, apart from the clinical presentation, is something called as a pulmonary alveolar proteinosis, or a crazy pavement appearance on a CT scan, which is due to the deposition of surfactant, which is either defective or not effectively cleared. And so the etiology of pulmonary alveolar proteinosis can be varied. It could be genetic syndromes, it could be underlying immunodeficiency, it could be secondary to infections, secondary to hematological malignancies, rheumatological syndromes, and in adults we also see autoimmune pulmonary alveolar proteinosis, which is because of presence of antibodies. So 90% of the surfactant metabolic protein dysfunctions that you see are actually autoimmune in etiology, but that is seen predominantly in adults. In the pediatric population, we see either the genetic, the hereditary, or the secondary variety. So this was a case which I had seen long back. This was a 2.6 kg full-term normal delivery, no risk factors in the mother, and he presented with respiratory distress at birth. So there were clearly no risk factors at all, and he required to be ventilated. And his X-ray showed a complete white-out lungs, like how you would see in a hyaline membrane disease in a preterm baby. He was given 3 doses of surfactants at intervals. He used to recover partially, but never recovered fully. Finally, he was discharged home on home oxygen, and all his workup was done, including an immunodeficiency workup for CF, and the disorders that we commonly know which will present in the neonatal period like this were all negative. Then a chest CT was done at the age of around 1 month, and which showed the classical crazy pavement appearance which occurs because of the intralobular, interlobular septal thickening, and which was very classical for a pulmonary alveolar proteinosis. A genetic workup was sent. By the time the report came, we lost the child, and that revealed a defect of surfactant protein dysfunction of the type B variety. So this is a standard list from a textbook. So you have various forms of surfactant metabolic protein disorders. And do you have a pointer? Okay. So typically you see that thank you so much. So typically you see, these are the ones which we commonly see in children. We know surfactant protein is of 4 varieties, A, B, C, and D. The B and the C are the ones which are responsible for production of surfactant, whereas A and D help in innate immunity. And what does surfactant do? It is our endogenous CPAP. It helps the alveoli to be patent at the end of expiration. So these are the common metabolic defects, the BC, the ABCA3, and the TTF1. I will talk about it a little later. And they generally, the type B and the ABCA3 present in the early neonatal period, but the type C can present at any time. It can present later in life, it can present even in adulthood. Similarly, the TTF1, which has multisystemic involvement, which has some CNS manifestations, hypothyroidism, again can present early in infancy, or it can present even later on in life. We also have another congenital defect, which is called the lysinuric protein intolerance. Here, the transport of amino acids through the macrophages is defective, and hence it causes deposition of surfactant inside the alveoli, and this also can present anytime after in the infancy, and it can cause, but it can also present later on in adulthood. This has a multi-systemic involvement because the transfer of amino acids across cells of various organs, the kidney, the lungs, etc., are all, and is including the brain, are defective, and therefore it has a multi-systemic involvement. We also have hereditary forms of surfactant metabolic protein disorders, where the granulocyte macrophage, that is the colony stimulate, the macrophage inside the lungs does not clear the surfactant which has been used to keep the airways patent. So when this surfactant is not cleared, we could have a surfactant metabolic protein dysfunction, and this is of two types based on the two subunits, that the alpha and the beta subunit on the receptor of the alveolar macrophages. We have these defects which present a little later in childhood, understandably so, because as the clearance of the used surfactant does not happen, surfactant accumulates. And so these kids present a little later in early childhood. So this surfactant gets deposited inside the alveolar space, and which interferes with gas exchange. Then we can have antibodies to the granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor. And these antibodies, this is called as autoimmune surfactant metabolic protein disorder, but this is typically seen more commonly in adults, where you have antibodies which inhibit the macrophages to clear the surfactant because of the antibodies which come in between the attachment. Again here, as I told you, it presents predominantly in adults. There are a lot of secondary forms of surfactant metabolic protein disorders which can follow hematological malignancies, immunodeficiencies, rheumatological disorders, in our country tuberculosis, and any other infections. And here the pathophysiology is either the macrophage, the numbers have come down, or the macrophages are dysfunctional, and therefore the surfactant is again not cleared. And this can present both in adults as well as in children. So when should we suspect? We should suspect it in a term neonate, like the case I mentioned, who comes with unexplained, difficult to treat respiratory distress. So if you have a preterm baby who has respiratory distress, you're more likely to think of hyaline membrane disease. But if you have a term neonate, no meconium, no other risk factors, no infection, this is a child with respiratory distress. We have 2-3 etiologies here, maybe a primary ciliary dyskinesia, which can come like this. The other defect is a surfactant metabolic protein disorders. Infants and children who present to you with failure to thrive and recurrent chronic respiratory symptoms with or without a positive family history. You may not know that somebody in the family has a similar disorder. Also, you need to think of this disorder. And children with interstitial lung disease of unknown etiology. And if you do a CT and you have the PAP findings, that is, you have interlobular septal thickening, then you will think in terms of this diagnosis. Or if you land up doing a proper biopsy and which is interpreted properly, again, you can clinch the diagnosis. Now I will present my case series, which we have handled over the last couple of years. We have had a total of 8 cases, out of which 5 were genetic or congenital in origin, 1 was secondary, and 2 we still need to confirm the etiology of the disease. We gave medical management to 2. 5 patients, we did a whole lung lavage. 2 patients, we did multiple lavages. 1 patient required 2, and another patient required 3 lung lavages. 1 patient has undergone a stem cell transplant. 1 patient we lost to follow-up, and 1 patient died, the first case which I've already presented. This was a girl who presented to us at the age of 2 years. Her symptoms started in the newborn period, and she presented with neonatal respiratory distress. She had tachypnea, hypoxemia, and her symptoms persisted. So she used to get better for some time, go home, again have some respiratory problem, and this is how it was going on. When she came to us at the age of 2 years, she was already on home oxygen, and a genetic defect was already done. So she had come to me with the diagnosis in her hand, and she showed a defect of the colony stimulating factor, the GM-CSF2RA receptor defect. So as I told you earlier, these are defects which present a little later in life because as the the surfactant accumulates inside the alveoli, it interferes with gas exchange, and these children present a little later. We did a whole lung lavage on her. The first time when we did a whole lung lavage, we did it, we'll talk to you about the procedure of the lavage a little later, but we did it with regular ventilation. It was an incomplete lavage because she did not tolerate it well. The second time when she came back after 6 months, we again did a whole lung lavage, and at this time we put her on ECMO and did a whole lung lavage. After the second lung lavage, it's already 2 years, and I spoke to her father just yesterday. She's absolutely fine, and this is the photograph he sent to me yesterday that she's absolutely fine and going to school, gaining weight. She also had type 1 Arnold-Chiari malformation. My second case, this was a 4-year, 8-month-old child, born of a 3rd-degree consanguineous marriage. Her symptoms started at the age of 2 years. So she had again recurrent, she was diagnosed as LRTI, cough, dyspnea. She was in and out of hospitals. Till 2 years of age, the parents said she was absolutely fine. Then she got these recurrent episodes of hypoxia, dyspnea, which required oxygenation, and she was treated with the regular nebulization, steroids, antibiotics. X-ray kept on showing some kind of reticular infiltrates, which had gradually increased over a period of 2 years that her symptoms persisted. And a CT scan done showed a classical crazy pavement appearance. She also had the same defect as my first patient, and she was also diagnosed as surfactant metabolic dysfunction. And in her case, even antibodies were sent because she was being handled by my adult colleague at Lilavati Hospital, and we were jointly handling her. So because adults see a lot of autoimmune PAP, so he sent antibodies and which were also negative. When she came to us, she was on 10 liters of oxygen, and with that she was maintaining with a non-rebreathing mask, and with that her saturation was around 92%. We had a big debate on how to do a lung lavage because she was in a very bad condition, right? So it was a collective decision that we do a lung lavage for her under ECMO, right? We looked at literature at that time. This was about almost 4 or 5 years back. So we looked at literature at that time, whether any literature shows use of ECMO and giving a whole lung lavage, but we could not find any write-up in the pediatric population on doing a whole lung lavage with ECMO for such a condition. So we went ahead with ECMO. It cleared her lungs. She was good for 1 year. After 1 year, she came back again. A second lavage was done. And post that, on the 3rd year, another lavage was done. After the 3rd lavage, post 3 months, we referred her for evaluation for stem cell transplant. She underwent allogenic stem cell transplant. She is now 2 years post-transplant, and she's doing absolutely well. I will show you her X-ray, and I'll show you her PFT, which is absolutely bang normal. So these are the genetic reports of the 2 patients that I just discussed. When we actually planned to do her whole lung lavage in ECMO, I was a little skeptical. My adult colleagues said, no, it's fine to do it. But I said, I'm dealing with a pediatric patient, the complications of ECMO, everything was bothering me. So I connected with Dr. Rishi from the UK. I said, have you done, and he had a large number of lung lavages to his credit. Have you done something like this with ECMO? He says, no. I have done in one patient 9 lavages, but I have never used ECMO. Sometimes we have to do it 2 to 3 times because in one sitting we cannot do it. So we went ahead and did it, and then he said, it sounds like an exciting proposal that you could do it with ECMO. And after COVID, he had another patient, the same patient whom he had already done 9 lavages, and that patient had developed a stricture because recurrently you're intubating, so that patient had developed a stricture. And it was very difficult to lavage that child. So they said, we will try now with ECMO. And they did, subsequent to that, then their next patient, they lavaged with ECMO. This was the team when we did it at the Lilavati Hospital where I was working. Now, this is this current child. We published this child, and this is her lung function test, which was just done 2-3 months back. Her lung functions are bang normal, and this is her current X-ray. So 2 years post-transplant, this girl is doing well. Let me take you through 2 of my other cases. Now, both these children, this first case, we have lost to follow-up. This is a 4-year-old child who came to us from Oman. And from the age of 2 years, he was symptomatic. He had enlarged salivary glands, which they diagnosed us. You'll have to give me 5 minutes, please. Actinomycotic infection, hepatosplenomegaly, transaminitis, and hypotonia. And CT was classical PAP. His genetic workup was not done. So his clinical presentation fitted into something called as lysinuric protein intolerance, which can cause PAP. This kid we lost to follow-up. Back to back, after this patient, we had another child who had similar presentation, but this child had HLH, recurrent respiratory, chronic diarrhea, failure to thrive, oxygen dependency, and this child had the mutation for lysinuric protein intolerance, which is also known to present with alveolar proteinosis. This child also underwent a whole lung lavage. This we did just about last month. We are still following up this child. Now, this is my oldest patient. This girl I saw about 10 years back. She presented at that time, and she was being treated for tuberculosis because she had symptoms of weight loss, breathlessness. There was some clubbing, and there were some crackles on auscultation, and the X-ray was diagnosed as miliary. This was the time we didn't have gene expert. So clinical TB was diagnosed. Though they did a bronchoscopy, this was at a government hospital, so they did a bronchoscopy, they got some past positive material, they didn't think much about it, she was put on AKT. The parent came to me for a second opinion, and these were her X-rays. These were her X-rays, completely wiped out. Her CT was something like this. So a total lung lavage was done, and this child we put on steroids and HCQ. From a lower strata, they had no, and in those days, we did not even have the facilities for doing a genetic workup. This child, I'm still following up. She comes from a small town in Maharashtra, and this again was published then. So I don't know whether she had TB or not, because we didn't have a microbiological diagnosis. But she's static, and she is now 11 years. I've told her, this time you come, I'm going to do your genetic test. Probably she's also the type C variety, because she's static. She has some amount of restrictive lung disease, but she's asymptomatic, not on oxygen. This was a very fascinating case. This is a 9-year-old healthy boy, and he developed COVID. After COVID, post 1 month after COVID, he suddenly was oxygen dependent. And he came to us after 2 to 3 months of on-home oxygen. And this was his CT, which showed a classical crazy pavement appearance. I thought maybe this would be surfactant protein C. And to my surprise, genetic testing drew me a blank. We did a whole lung lavage. It's like almost now 3 years. Child is absolutely fine. So this was probably secondary to infection, where the surfactant could not get cleared, got deposited in the lung. My other case, this is a case which we are now handling. Dr. Abhinaya will know this case. This was a 4-year-old male child referred to me from Nasik, had neonatal respiratory distress, was ventilated. From 2 years of age, he had periods of wellness in between, and then he used to have some recurrent respiratory so-called pneumonias. And his CT showed some GGOs, some ILD changes, some bronchiectasis. I never thought that this child would have a surfactant metabolic protein disorder. We sent the genetic workup. It showed the type C, the autosomal dominant variety. He also has a pectus excavatum, which is described with type C surfactant metabolic protein disorders. This child we have put on azithromycin and HCQ. We are following up this child. He does not require oxygen. He's stable as of now. Let's see what future holds for him. This case I already presented. So I'm going to just skip for the want of time. I'm not going to bore you through the metabolism of surfactant, but just to show you this slide, that the type 2 alveolar cell present, the surfactant is formed here, and then into the endoplasmic reticulum from where it is released. The ABCA3 gene helps in coating it with the lipids before it is released out, right? So all these genetic mutations cause, and this is the macrophage which finally clears the used surfactant. So all these genetic mutations are responsible for these dysfunctions. diagnosis, CT scan shows a classical ground glassing opacities in the alveolar spaces with thickening of the interlobular and the intralobular septa. And it can progress to a more fibrotic pattern. So it depends on what stage of the disease that you will do a CT. If you do it very early, sometimes you may not even really see the crazy pavement appearance. I don't know, Dr. Gary, if you remember way back in 2006, when I was in Southampton with you, that was the first time I saw first alveolar proteinosis. This was a 6-week-old child who was coughing continuously and on rounds. And at that time I said, why don't we do a CT on this? But I know the reservations of doing a CT. And he said, no, we will wait. And I think it was done some 3 weeks later, and that child turned out to be alveolar proteinosis. So that was my first case, which I first saw with you. I guess you inspired me to see so many more. If you do a bronchoscopy and a BAL, you will get milky fluid, which is PAS positive for surfactant material. It can be present extracellularly or intracellularly in the macrophages. Genetic test, if the mutation is defined, you can pick it up. Lung biopsy in today's time probably is not required because genetic workup will help us. But in a doubtful case, maybe it may still need to be done. A pulmonary function test would show a restrictive pattern. Anti-GM-CSF antibodies to be done only when you think of autoimmune PAP. Just a word on the whole lung lavage. See, in adults, it's very easy. What they use is a double lumen ET tube, right? So this is your double lumen ET tube. While you ventilate one lung, you lavage the other lung. And generally, they could do the whole lavage in 2 sittings, 1 lung at a time, and again do the second sitting. In children, neither do we have a double lumen ET tube, nor the size of the airway to put the tube. Therefore, it's a big problem. And therefore, in our very sick patients, we did it with ECMO. Now, I'm not saying ECMO is the best. ECMO also has its own hazards, complications of bleeding, pulmonary hemorrhage, thromboembolism, CNS complications, etc. But patients who are very sick with respiratory failure, who are requiring a lot of oxygen support, it's not possible to go through the whole procedure because they continuously desaturate. Absolutely. So, but once you do the whole procedure, as our experience has been, these kids have been well for more than a year or 2 after the whole lavage. So I guess in a very sick child, if we have to do it in ECMO, under ECMO, with the ECMO support, I think it gives a lot of benefit to the patient. The longer the surfactant stays inside the lungs, more is the risk of fibrosis also of the lungs and poorer outcomes and poorer lung function. So we used a VA ECMO in both the patients that we did. I've already mentioned about the hematopoietic stem cell transplant. One of our patients has done well. There are very few literature in the world, but this could be a modality of treatment. Transplantation has not shown promising results. In autoimmune PAP, one can use granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor either subcutaneously or in the form of nebulized therapy. Other therapies like plasmapheresis, rituximab, steroids, immunomodulation have all been tried. HCQ, I think, has some promise in some of these patients and can be used. In lysinuric protein intolerance, you need to use protein-restricted diet and addition of citrulline. So I'd like to conclude by saying that we need to think of it as a cause. Now, because we have access to genetic testing today, we are going to diagnose more of these conditions. And I'm sure we are missing them because their phenotypic presentation is very, very variable. This child with the pectus excavatum that we had, in my faintest of dreams, I never thought that child would turn out to be a surfactant metabolic protein disorder. So I think we need to keep our eyes open. And when we look at these kids, we should be aware that the phenotypic variability is huge. It can present at any age, okay? And genetic test can help us diagnose. In a few cases, you may require lung biopsy. Use of ECMO for whole lung lavage is beneficial in children, especially who are very sick, hypoxic, and with long-standing PAP. Some children show, especially the type C, shows improvement with drugs like HCQ. The oldest girl that I have, who's 21 years old now, she has been on HCQ and she's stable. I'm not saying HCQ worked on her, but it can be tried in the ones who are milder. we need more data on stem cell transplant and whether that can become a modality of treatment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Are there any questions? Of course, we are running out of time. So, if there are any, we can allow.
It was a wonderful session, ma'am. And in fact, we should think beyond the respiratory distress syndrome of the newborn, which we generally think that the surfactant is absent in that condition also. We have to think of that adult, means childhood can also present with the surfactant deficiency or the metabolism or the dysfunction at any other levels. Thank you, madam, for the eye-opener, especially for us youngsters to know more about that this exists.
A brilliant presentation as usual, madam. I mean, just a comment actually, not a question. We saw about similar 5-6 patients, and in newborn, I had 3 patients uniformly with severe RDS, could not wean from ventilator, eventually died, and all those 2 or 3 turned out to be surfactant protein B, so uniformly fatal. Third time I diagnosed this is surfactant B, in a newborn it turned out to be ABCA. So ABCA also can present with newborn severe form of RDS. The third was something that was 4 years, and I managed till 6 years with tracheostomy, oxygen, surfactant protein C. It just went down and lost to follow-up. But we were very impressed with your CSF related mutations and the ECMO and what you say,
Stem cell transplant.
and
Stem cell
and
transplant.
whole lung lavage that you have done. It's something commendable. Thank you. That's
Thank
a
you
good
so much.
information.
So typically in the neonatal period, you have B or ABCA3, which presents, and the others generally present later.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.